So thanks, Randy, for putting this all together and bringing this down here. So I'm talking about supporting QGIS at an academic library. So I'm a GIS librarian at Cornell University up in upstate, what we call upstate New York. I don't know where upstate starts. It's not New York City. We're out in the, I smell cow manure from my house. So we're out in farm country. Cornell's in Ithaca, New York, if you're curious. So the question is, what does a GIS librarian do? How many people have ever talked to a GIS librarian? Oh, a fair number of you. Well, there was a nice fifth grader who interviewed me and put this nice poster together asking that very question, what is a GIS, or GIS geospatial data librarian? Apparently, they look something like this. Like to look at like drive time, distances or something, and map projections. But this is a really nice summary here. This may be a direct quote from the interview. He spends his days helping researchers find, access, and use geospatial data. So let's break that down a little bit. Who are these researchers we're talking about? This can be anyone. Work with undergrads, graduate students, faculty, staff, even some community members come in and ask for help with GIS type of questions. This is just a short list of all the departments that I've worked with, people asking questions in all sorts of realms of academic endeavor. Find data. So what does that mean? Yep. So I help people use Google to find data. We also host some data at a website called Cougar. It's the Cornell University Geospatial Information Repository. Just a quick aside. So with our website, we're using a lot of other open source geospatial software, PostGIS, GeoServer, Solar, and GeoBlacklight. So all those components work together to serve that site out. Also in terms of finding data, this is a project. If you're ever looking for data, if you're interested in helping curate data for this site, geolo.org. It's basically just a bunch of bookmarks to a bunch of sites that have data. So once they have that data, they need to access and use the data. So what does that mean? Well, increasingly that means QGIS. I've been the geospatial data librarian at Cornell for, I think, since about 2007. So we do a lot of ARC. QGIS is something that we brought on several years ago, and the use is just really increasing. I guess I've been a QGIS user since 2011. I was like searching my old emails and announcements and things like that to try to figure out when did I first really start using it. And I found this presentation from GIS Day 2011. We were mainly using ArcGIS and Manifold. Anyone ever use Manifold? All right. Well,
is it still around?
What's that?
Is it still around?
I think so. So I was giving a talk about trying to chop up some contour lines into towns in New York State. It was a lot of data. It kind of took a little while to process. And apparently I was really excited about QGIS at the time because I added this, whatever this is called, shape burst, QGIS. QGIS was at version 1.7 back then. It was still called Quantum GIS before dropping the quantum name. And so I was, as I said, clipping a lot of contour data. These were 2-meter contours, so really detailed line work. And this was the comparison that I came up with. QGIS at the time was like, I don't know, like 8 times faster. So it's like, wow, should take a closer look at this. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Well, this is a screenshot of QGIS 2.0 came out in September 2013. Yeah, I don't know what that is. And I felt that the step up to 2.0 was a big change in terms of the solidity of the interface and all that. So the next spring, that's when I started introducing a QGIS workshop at the library. We were also doing ArcGIS and Manifold, as I mentioned. But this is a graph of the questions for where I kept track of what software people were using. You can see 2014 is when I started introducing the workshops, and it's just kind of gone uphill since then. Key point here is that 50% line was crossed last year in 2018, and we're on track to be over 60% of all the questions I deal are now about QGIS. Now this is in despite of the fact that the main GIS classes at Cornell and a couple departments, they focus primarily on ArcMap. There's a newer one that focuses on ArcGIS Pro. There are a couple of faculty who are using QGIS as the main desktop system, so it's slowly working its way into different departments at Cornell. I've been kind of quietly trying to push it and promote it across campus. So we want to get that even higher percentage. So how do we use QGIS as a library? So these are researchers across all these different departments at Cornell, and they want some help. So I'll use QGIS to explore data, edit data, analyze data, and mapping data. So I'm going to walk through each of these a little bit, just kind of highlight some of the features of QGIS that are really useful. I'm not going to cover everything. So exploring data. First of all, it starts up pretty fast. Certainly faster than the other program I have on my computer. It's about at least 3 times faster to start up. So I can just, if I'm exploring a new data set that I've just downloaded, it starts up fast. And then I can just drag and drop files in. It doesn't matter what the file type is generally. Dragging it in, it just does its thing, and the data's there to look at almost immediately. There's also the great data source browser. You don't have to make a connection to a folder in order to find the data. And then you can also bookmark things as favorites. So if you do have a data folder that you go to frequently, you can add that. And in the data source browser, have quick access to your favorite data sets. Big use of the Quick Map Services plugin. So if you're not familiar with this, it's a plugin that gives you access to base maps from a wide range of data providers. This is great because it will give context to your data. You can make sure, first of all, that your projections are correct. When things line up, you know things are good. If you see something strange in the data set that you just downloaded, it's like, well, what's at that point? And you can look at some aerial imagery, for example, to see what's there on the ground. How many people know about this trick? If you type in the area where you usually have your coordinates, you type the word world, you get this data set of country boundaries. It's not really detailed, but it's great for giving a little context to your map. So sometimes I'll use that rather than finding where my official country boundaries are. So a really quick shortcut. There's a couple other things you can type in there. You can Google for that later. Some of them will make you dizzy. I'll just say that. The value tool, this is another plugin that is really useful when you're exploring any kind of raster data set. So as you move your mouse, once you've enabled this, as you move the mouse over your map, you'll see an instant readout of what the raster values are. This is really great, especially, I didn't have an example here of, if you have 2 different data sets of elevation, maybe one at a different scale, you can hover your mouse over it and you can see all the values of all your rasters at that given point. So use that a lot to explore a data set and trying to evaluate, is this a good data set for this particular use case? Delimited text. A lot of data sets are downloaded as CSV files or maybe even Excel files. But for CSV, QGIS handles it really well, a lot better than some other programs. Have you ever opened a CSV in Excel, for example? Dates get mangled. Strings that start with zeros, they get interpreted as numbers, and things just break down from there. So I like to say that QGIS loves tables. So what do I mean by it loves tables? That means that, when you love someone, you respect them, you do what's right for them, and you do no harm to them. So there should be like a Hippocratic oath of software where you don't harm the data. If it's a string that starts with a 0, you don't turn it into a number and you lose that leading 0. So do no harm. There's a feature in QGIS that will automatically detect field types. You can turn that off, so if there is an issue where you don't want it to automatically recognize those, you uncheck that box, everything comes in as a string, and then you can deal with it from there, kind of its an original state. And then you can use a tool like refactor fields to explicitly say that, yes, these values are integers or not strings. You can also delete fields in this refactor and only output the fields that you actually want to work with. So it's really great for kind of fine-tuning your data set. I'll also mention that QGIS actually respects the Excel data types. So if you do get some data coming in from an Excel spreadsheet, there used to be a plugin you had to use, and now you can just, if it's an xlsx file, you can just load those right in, and it works. I just did a test of this. If you define these cells as date types, for example, QGIS will recognize that. So it handles that pretty well. So it's really great for handling any kind of tabular data. In fact, I've used QGIS to look at data that has nothing geospatial just because it's a nicer environment for me to look at a table, especially when you can treat it as a virtual layer. If you're not familiar with these, it's a way of any of your data sets that are in your list of layers that you've added to your project, you can work with it with SQL. So you could do like a summary, do some basic data analysis of a table, even if it's coming in as a CSV. It doesn't have to be in a database. So that's a really great feature, and I've used that on many occasions for non-geospatial data. So QGIS is a great tool for that. Let's talk about editing data a bit. If you're doing a table join, one of my favorite features of this is that you don't have to join every field. You can choose and select, I just want these 3 fields out of the set of 80 that comes with like some census data, for example. So you don't end up with all this extra stuff that you don't really want. So table joins are great. The way you can edit and update selected features, so you can just highlight certain rows and say, I want to set the backcountry column in this to yes, and then just say update just those selected fields. The interface is very simple. It works like you think it should, and then it also doesn't save those changes until you say, yes, I really do want to save this and overwrite my existing file. So that interface is really, really nice. There's a variety of selection tools for selecting rows in a table or selecting points on a map. Obviously, there's the graphical selection tools where you can draw a rectangle or draw a freehand shape around certain areas. But there's also a powerful expression editor where, in this case, we're looking for features where the operator is the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, and this is just a demo of the type ahead and autocomplete and syntax highlighting that's in the expression editor. So you can make a relatively complicated expression and it'll help you along the way. There's a huge list of functions that you can use over here. So it's a powerful expression editor. In fact, it's a very powerful expression editor. However, if you just need to do a simple selection, there's this great select by value where you get a form, and again, it has nice autocomplete, so you can just start typing in one of these fields, and oh, there's some discrepancy in the data, I noticed as well. Once you have these selections, obviously you can export them to a new layer. I also like this feature where you can just paste those selected features that you've copied to a temporary scratch layer. So it may not be a data set that you necessarily want to keep, but you just want to temporarily use it to work with something. So you can just kind of copy and paste. What other GIS programs do that? Yeah, so temporary scratch layers is another thing. I can create a new layer. Sometimes I'm working with someone who's trying to develop a workflow of analysis, and they have like 10 million points they're going to be doing this on. We don't want to kind of test a workflow on data sets that large, so often I'll just make really quick, simple fake data sets that we can just kind of walk through the workflow and show them how the sequence might work. So I'll often make temporary scratch layers, points, polygons, and lines, and then just use that to work with. All right, so analyzing data. Obviously, there's the processing toolbox. Niall showed a bit of this. This is just a scroll through all of the different tools, and it just goes on and on and on. I think with every version, new release, they've added several new tools. Sometimes they'll take things that used to be separate plugins and built that into core QGIS functionality. They're also working on optimizing some of these. So I like all the ones that have the Q. It's like solid. Sometimes it gets a little more problems arise when I'm trying to run a Saga tool, for example, or the grass tools from within QGIS, because those were designed for a different environment. So the QGIS tools are nice and solid. This is a excerpt from the changelog for 3.8. It's a really nice example of where actually Niall did this tool. So he recognizes that overlap analysis is something that people do all the time. And let me just read a little bit here. But yet the process is full of traps for inexperienced users. And the amount of manual data work is usually done can often lead to mistakes and inaccurate results. So he recognizes this is something that people do all the time. That process, even if you know what you're doing, there's the room for human error. So why not make a tool that just does what most people want to do with this sort of thing anyway, and just make a one-click kind of tool for this. So recognizing the need of functionality and then making that happen. Here's another example. People always want to maybe export data off into SBS or another statistics package. They want the coordinates in the data table. In the past, you'd always been limited to, I can export the kind of native coordinates of whatever coordinate system this data is in. With this new add XY fields to a layer, you can export coordinates in any coordinate system. So you don't have to reproject your data first and then export. So it's these little things like that where the developers of QGIS, Nile, and all the others, they're thinking about that workflow because they use the software as well, and they want to make things as straightforward as possible. The other thing I absolutely love is temporary outputs. Every time you run a processing tool, you have the option of saving it to a file. You can also just have it be a temporary layer. I can't imagine how many files I would have on my computer right now if I didn't use that. So these are outputs that, they show up in your list of layers. You work with them, you can style them. If it's just a temporary thing, it didn't work out the way you wanted and you want to redo it again, you don't have to then go back into your file folder and figure, okay, now which one was the test ones that didn't work out? I need to delete those just to clear up space. So they don't clutter up your drive. If you do want to keep them, keep the output, you can just right-click that layer and say make it permanent. And it keeps all your styling and everything. So use that all the time. It also outputs to geopackages. How many people have worked with geopackages? All right, about half of the people. So geopackage is a more modern data format that overcomes a lot of the limitations of shapefiles. If you're interested in that, there's a nice page that kind of talks about what are the drawbacks of shapefiles. You have a 10-character limit on the column names and so on. Switch from shapefile. And they talk about geopackage as one of the potential replacements. Switch from shapefile.org. All right, so the last category was mapping data. So taking this data and making maps. And I should say that people who come to our GIS Help Desk for assistance, sometimes they just want to do some analysis, get some numbers, and then take it off into their statistical analysis programs. In other cases, they want to make a map of, maybe it's a map for a publication or a map for internal use, either way. One thing I like about QGIS is that when you have something like overlapping features, you can't really tell how many points are piled up here. With some other software, you can add transparency and it'll look like this. So it's applying the transparency to that whole layer. QGIS has this great feature-by-feature opacity where you can see other features through the features that are on top. Plus, it has things like blending modes where, and I don't fully understand all the different options, but multiply works really well for a lot of things. Basically, as there's more and more blue, it multiplies and becomes a darker and darker and darker blue. So sometimes blending modes are nice ways of bringing out a visualization of the data. Niall talked about this a bit, the data-defined override. So whenever you see this icon over here on the right, to the right of an option, that means you can define an expression or pick a field to control the value of that thing. Label expressions, so for dynamic labeling, this is great. So this is a case where I had a column called length that had the length of the roads in each of these towns. I have another column called name, and this is an expression that kind of puts that all together. It converts from meters to miles, it rounds it off, it adds the words miles, and it also puts that nice line break between there. Not having to create a separate column to do this calculation and then display that column, you can just do it all in this expression dialog. Niall showed draw effects, make things pop a little bit, add a drop shadow, for example. Another thing I like to use a lot is the QGIS to Web plugin. What this does is it takes the cartography that you've set up in QGIS and it creates all the files you would need to have a leaflet map or an open layers map. So these are JavaScript applications that would run in your web browser. It outputs all the files you need, and then you can kind of tweak that if you want to do a little more customization. It does a really good job of converting as much of the cartography decisions that you've made. I had someone who was wanting to make a web map, and I thought, oh, we can use this plugin. And then I saw the cartography that they had set up, where they had diagonal lines on one pattern, and they had all these different styles, so you could see these diagonal lines versus these diagonal lines. And I thought, ooh, I don't know if it's going to handle all that, but it did. So great credit to I think it's Tom Chadwin in the UK who's done a lot of the development on that. But in the latest 3.8, I shouldn't say latest anymore. The old version 3.8, so 3.10 is probably out right now. There was a feature added where it basically took that functionality of that plugin. The plugin was developed. It worked pretty well. It had a couple little quirks, but I was glad to see it built into put into a built-in QGIS function called generate XYZ tiles, where the idea is that you set the extent of where you want to generate the tiles, what zoom levels you want, and then it'll take your cartography that you have there and it'll just generate all those little image files. So basically, QGIS is great. Thanks, Randy, for getting us all together, because I just really wanted to stand in front of a room of people and just say, QGIS is really great. I did a workshop a couple weeks ago. Well, actually, I just did another one last week. But I had a faculty member who has taught a GIS course periodically in his department. And he's used ArcMap traditionally. And then after taking my intro QGIS course, he came up to me after and he said, I think I'm going to switch over my entire curriculum. So he was very impressed with the capabilities of QGIS. I just wanted to end by talking a little bit about contributing back to the QGIS project. Obviously, there's people like Niall who are like superheroes who contribute so much to the project. But there's other ways to contribute back as well. Teaching workshops using QGIS, helping people get started with the program. Maybe helping them migrate from another program, or just helping them get started with GIS in general. So we offer GIS support at our GIS Help Desk, and I feel that people know that they can go there for QGIS support as well as other GIS support. Just gives them the confidence to say this is an avenue worth pursuing. There will be support. There's a lot of support on the web. GIS Stack Exchange is probably, I don't know, like 80% QGIS questions. I don't know. I just made that up. Whenever you hear 80%, you know it's made up. You can report bugs. There are some nice guidelines on the QGIS website of where do you report things, because as a someone who doesn't report a lot of bugs, and I'm not really that involved with developer community, for example, I kind of watch a little bit of what happens. It's like, okay, I want to report a bug. I want to make sure I do it right. So first of all, always be polite. Try to explain in detail what happened, what were you trying to do. They have all those kind of guidelines here. You might even find a bug on the website. That stuff's important too. So they have some nice guidance there. And I have an example. This is from a year or so ago. So something was going on when converting formats. It was ignoring no data values of 0, for example. So I reported this. I reported this at 10:24 a.m. So Niall down there in Australia, it was probably like 12:30 his time. So he was probably asleep at that point. By 8 something that evening, he had a pull request. He had a fix for this thing. So he must have woken up and just fixed this and probably several other things that morning. The guy's amazing. I'm not going to say that every bug report is going to get fixed that quickly, but sometimes it happens. You can also fix bugs. I ventured into this myself. I've always wanted to. I do a little bit of program, but not at the level of QGIS development. So I'm always like, okay, there's got to be something I can do to fix something, right? I finally found it. In the interface, I was converting things to aerial units, and the abbreviation for acres was acres with a little superscript 2, like acres squared. I don't even know what that means, but obviously an error. So I reported that. Actually, I didn't just report. I actually went and modified the code. The full extent of my change was to take that one character out. So I submitted my change, and Niall accepted it and said thanks. So that was great. Felt great to hey, my first pull request to QGIS. Whoa! So maybe it'll all scale up from there. I didn't add anything. I just took something away. So QGIS, they come out with new releases every 4 months. They've been sticking to that schedule pretty rigorously. And every 4 months, that's a whole new set of features. If you want to know when the next release is, well, obviously we know it's coming out today, but there is this roadmap document where you can see the release schedule. So we can see, here's 3.10 scheduled to come out today. 3.12 will be out February 21st, so mark your calendars, have a party. There's also the changelog. How many people have seen the visual changelog? Oh, more of you should look at this. Every time a new version comes out, I look at it. I make the time. It's really long, so you might want to get something to eat, get a cup of coffee if that's your thing, because it's going to take you a while to just go through this list of new features. I'm always amazed with what's in here. A lot of it's maybe not relevant to the work I do or the type of work that I see students and faculty doing, but it's good to have an overview of what has changed. Sometimes I see things in here where there is a new tool that does a thing in a much easier way. So So I think a lot of us get stuck in the ruts of like, well, this is the way that works right now. I've been doing this for 3 years. It still works. Little do I know, there's this new tool that actually makes it so much easier. So I suggest looking through this changelog and trying to figure out which of these new features will make your life easier. And I'm just going to end with that. So, thank you.
So if I wanted to get help at the Cornell, do I have to be a student there, or can I just come in as a public and go, I need help?
Yeah, so so we have a help desk that's open in the afternoon. We have this consultation area where like all these different groups from around campus, like there's statistical consulting, they'll come in and staff a desk. So I have a GIS desk. It's myself and a colleague. So we're there in the afternoon, and people can just drop by. So if you're in the area, feel free to stop by.
Sweet.
You can email me in advance too. We also set appointments, and I've been trying to balance. Okay, if people want to set an appointment, that means I'm not going to be available at that time to meet with someone who walks in. And so far, it's usually worked out. We've had a couple things where it's like, oh, can you just wait like another 10 minutes and then I can be with you. But New York State, Cornell University is a weird university that is partly private and partly public, so we do have an obligation to the citizens of New York State. But honestly, if you're coming from Tennessee, you don't have to tell us, and I'd help you. I'd help you.
Like it wouldn't be obvious walking in the door.
Yeah.
Is your your course that you've been teaching, is it just an introduction basically to QGIS? Like how do you start using it? You're a new brand new user.
Yeah. So I'd clarify, it's not a course, but it's just a one-time workshop. So I've been doing like 2-hour intro workshops, and that covers the basics of and some people have never used GIS before, so I'm kind of balancing that as well. I have done some presentations where I was like, this is QGIS for people who've used this other thing. So don't have to cover some of the basics. But yeah, it's really like taking different data sets, bringing it in, figuring out how to explore that data, stylize it in different ways, a little bit of processing.
Right.
I have not yet developed, well, I've done some other workshops for specific classes where they have certain tasks in mind. Like landscape architects, there's certain things they want to do, like make contour lines and export stuff to AutoCAD and Rhino and things like that. But I find that the intermediate stuff's different because once you've covered the basics of bringing stuff in, stylizing, knowing where tools are, it's like everyone wants to do something different.
Sure.
So it's kind of, I haven't quite developed a curriculum that will cover a big chunk of those people. But certainly hope to.
Do you share any of that content?
Yeah, actually, I have a GitHub site or a GitHub account where I have a lot of the materials up there. We have, if you Google like Cornell GIS, I have this library guide that covers a lot of things, and I don't know if I explicitly say, but anyone who wants to use any of my materials, feel free, because I know I've benefited from everyone else's materials out there.
I stalk his GitHub page. Your GitHub notes.
Oh, the gists?
Yeah, the gists.
Right, yeah.
I kind of stalk those and look at the stuff you've been doing.
Yeah, I keep wanting to like compile those together, and because how you find those. Now I'm a librarian, so it's all about like getting access to materials. I need to organize those a bit more and make it more findable. Yeah. All right. Well, feel free to catch me later. We can chat.
Cool.